Hello, everybody, and welcome into the SFA Season 17 schedule release. It is finally here. We are finally ready to get Season 17 on its way, and we've gone with some major realignment this season. The conferences all look a little bit different. We've got more independent teams, we've got auto bids to the playoff. So, really leaning into a new era here in the SFA. So, we're going to go through only the users' schedules here today, and then I'll post the full grids a little bit later. The big addition this season is Week 0, tying games based on previous season results to give us a massive slate of some of the best games that we're going to see all season in Week 0. And then the New Heights Classic will be in Week 1 like usual. So we'll go through all the user schedules like I said, and then I'll upload this video to YouTube, and then we will release the full grids in the server like usual. So we'll kick it off here. Not going to be with Air Force. First and foremost, we're going to go down to Arizona. Coach Hunt, first schedule we see of the year. Remember, those @ are your away games. So, new look, Pac-12 a little bit. BYU now is in conference. And then their out-of-conference schedule is going to be at Virginia versus New Mexico and at Kansas State. So, that's going to be in Eastern Michigan. So, Eastern Michigan is going to be a pretty tough game, I think, for them. But Arizona and Coach Hunt, they do have a great defensive front, so I think that they should probably be okay here out of conference. Now moving on, we're going to go to Arizona State. Arizona State coach Piglet, and they are, once again, they're facing Eastern Michigan, Florida Atlantic, ULM, some easier games, and then Navy there in Week 6. And once again, BYU is not independent anymore. They are in the Pac-12. So very interesting schedule there. And then now we got Coach Cabbage over at Auburn, I believe. Let me just make sure. Yes, it is Coach Cabbage over at Auburn. And here's our first Week 0 game. With this one, we already know it's the Cotton Bowl kickoff versus Oklahoma State and Coach Fed. So that's going to be a very interesting matchup. Then they play at Troy versus Ohio. And then their other out-of-conference game, it looks like, is going to be Georgia Tech there in Week 8. So very fun games there. Remember, everybody now has a 8-conference game schedule and 4 non-conference games as well. With now Week 15, which is Week 14 here, going to be a rivalry game. So we got Alabama in the Iron Bowl. So next up, we've got Baylor coach Flame here. Another Week 0 matchup. This one is going to be against Fresno State. So Baylor taking on Fresno. They'll take on Houston, which is a conference, or no, it's not a conference game. Notre Dame on the schedule. SMU back on the schedule as well here for Baylor. For those guys that don't know, the old days, Baylor would always play SMU in Week 1 and lose. So that'll be a fun kind of a rematch. And then they got Texas A&M on the schedule. Those are conference games now this season. Moving on, we've got Boise State, who has moved to the Mountain West this year. And oh boy, they got a rather tough out-of-conference starting with at Clemson, at California. That's not going to be great. But then they also get Georgia State, and then they also get, looks like UCLA. So tough road here for Boise State, who had a really good year last year. I do think that they are a dark horse for that division. So we'll see what they can do. Really, that Wyoming game is going to be massive for Boise State this year. So now Mills and Boston College. They are going to be facing TCU to kick off. This is a team who is now independent. So they have 6 or technically 7 non-conference games, and then they face all of the other independent teams. So they're going to face Army, Navy, Air Force. They'll face Notre Dame and also Memphis, who are the other independents. And it looks like they also got Ohio State. They got Oregon on the schedule. So some very tough opponents, but also some rather cupcakes. So Georgia Southern, Virginia Tech have not been very good the last couple of years. Alabama's not been very good the last handful of years. So that is a very interesting schedule for Mills and Boston College. And remember, the highest ranked independent team gets an auto bid. So watch out for that. So now we go to California. Coach Ron, his debut here at California Golden Bears. They'll start it out against Illinois. You got Boise State. We saw that one earlier. They got Fresno State and they got Houston. So rather easy out of conference. Fresno State probably the toughest game of the bunch. And then they got both USC and Oregon on the schedule and on the road. So that's going to be tough for them. But then they have a decent stretch down a decent draw down the stretch. Now we move on to Coastal Carolina. Bryce Beers. They will be facing Central Michigan in Week 0. Two very good teams. And remember, the Coastal Carolina made the semifinals last year. They also got USC on the schedule. That's going to be fun. Louisville's on the schedule. Or no, that's a conference game. Army is on the schedule, and North Carolina Week 9. Anytime Coastal and North Carolina match up, it is going to be a good game. So that's going to be a lot of fun. Next up, we got Colorado and Coach Moon. And it looks like they do not have a Week 0 game, but as always, Colorado State is played at Invesco Field at Mile High in Denver, Colorado. Tough draw for them. I mean, you got Texas A&M, Oklahoma on the schedule. Nebraska is a non-conference game now as they move to the Big Ten. So going to be an interesting season here for the Buffaloes. Now Eastern Michigan, we got Bob Toledo, Arizona State, Duke, Purdue, Arizona. Pretty good draw if you're a MAC team. This is a dark horse in the MAC for sure this year. And those are going to be some big games down the stretch against Central Michigan and Western Michigan. It's cool that those are in the last couple of weeks. But I would say Eastern Michigan probably the favorite to win their division this season. Now we go to Florida, and we get Coach Tribe's schedule. They've got a Week 0 game against Georgia Tech. They got Washington on the schedule, who should be pretty good this year. And then they also, looks like they've got Florida State and Miami to end the year. So definitely a tough stretch there after the Week 9 bye week. So now we got Florida State and Jackie Moon. They've got Cincinnati in the Fiesta Bowl kickoff. And then they've got Fresno State versus Kennelly. UCF on the schedule. So there's your first look there, Mercury. And then they've also, Miami's back in the ACC. So that's not an out-of-conference game. They got Virginia Tech in Week 14. Next up, we've seen Fresno quite a bit. Coach Kennelly, they are facing Baylor in that Week 0 game. Florida State, Boise State, Cal, we've already seen that full thing. But here's a look at the rest of their schedule. Even though they don't have Chadley Brown, they had a very good year, so they are one of the favorites to repeat and win this division from a couple of years ago. Georgia Southern, new coach. Coach Coco is back. He's facing Michigan State in his first game. And then they've got Kentucky. They've got Boston College on the schedule. And then they also have App State on the schedule as well as a non-conference game. So very light for them. I mean, Michigan State is the best of the bunch. So now we go to Georgia Tech in the ACC. We already saw this Week 0 kickoff game, but they also got Texas Tech on the schedule. They've got, who else? Georgia is on the schedule, and then who's their other out-of-conference game? Auburn right there in the middle under rivalry game. So tough out of conference. You got 3 SEC teams in Texas Tech. So now Hawaii and Coach Woolley. We've got UAB, Utah State, Texas A&M, and Air Force. I didn't know that they played for a trophy against Hawaii. That's interesting. You got, and then Army as well. And remember, those games are non-conference. And Golden Screwdriver, I guess, is the rivalry name against Fresno State. Houston, new coach. They are facing Purdue, at Baylor, NC State, and Cal before they start Conference USA action. And then Coach Cam at Illinois. They're going on the road at Cal. Got to go at LSU. And then they have Missouri and Florida Atlantic at home before a bye week and before they start a grueling conference schedule. They face Nebraska, Ohio State, Iowa, Michigan, and Minnesota this season. I'm doing all only users, Dogwater, so you're going to be towards the end. Indiana and Coach Nathan. Iowa is the first game. You got Kentucky. Oh, there's a big one. We got Indiana facing Rutgers, his former school that just fired him. We'll see what happens in that one. And then at North Texas as well. They also got Notre Dame on the schedule down there. Now Iowa and Coach Jarkis. One of the biggest moves in realignment was Maryland going back to the ACC, but we still will have the Battle of the Beak in Week 15. That is a yearly matchup that will not be changed. And then we also obviously have everybody's favorite game, the Cy-Hawk game. If you're going to pick one game in the SFA that kind of encapsulates what the SFA has always been about, it is the Cy-Hawk game. So Week 4, it's going to be awesome. They also got Louisiana and UTEP on the schedule. Now we go to Iowa State and Coach Schwartz, Coach of the Year last year, the Sugar Bowl kickoff. They will be facing Oklahoma here in New Orleans. That's going to be a fantastic game. Then you've got Army on the schedule, Iowa and Troy before starting a conference schedule. But they avoid the big bad Texas A&M game, so that's good for Iowa State. Kent State and Coach Blazing, they've got Louisville to start the season. Then they're going at Purdue, at Michigan State, and then they got San Jose State a little bit later. I think Ohio is definitely the team to be in the division, but they definitely could make their way into the conference championship game. So now let's go to LA Tech and Coach Keats starting at Ohio. That'll be a fun game. Western Kentucky, Wyoming, a lot of users on the schedule here. And then they've also, looks like they'll be facing at Southern Miss as well a little bit later on. Louisville and Coach Calv. He'll be starting at Kent State. We saw that one. Rice is going to be pretty easy. Coastal Carolina, Charlotte. And then they also, it looks like Memphis is on the schedule and Kentucky to end the season. LSU and Coach Lama starting a Week 0 game against Texas. The first no longer a conference game, but this is the Orlando kickoff. Going to be a fun one. They also have Illinois on the schedule. Arkansas is now a conference matchup. And then they got Tulane once again to end the season in the Battle of the Rag. Now we go to Maryland, who, like I said, is moving to the ACC. They're keeping that Battle of the Beak game. But they also have, looks like, UTSA on the schedule. They've got Texas on the schedule. And where's their other non-conference game? Texas, UTSA. Oh, I guess West Virginia is not in the conference. They're in the AAC. So Maryland is having a pretty easy, pretty light schedule, I would say, even though they do have to face East Carolina and North Carolina. Never mind, this is not easy whatsoever. I don't know what I'm smoking. Miami, and back in the ACC after a couple of years, they'll be facing UCF, Buffalo, Navy, and then also they will be facing Florida to end the season. Now we got Michigan. Coach Mango always harps on Coach Rick, who really makes most of the schedule for giving them a tough one. He has the Week 0 game against North Carolina, the Orange Kickoff. Oklahoma State was tough last year, probably not as tough this year. They got Virginia Tech, and then they have Temple. I don't think you can really complain about this schedule. Sure, you got Penn State and Ohio State, but you always have those teams. So, pretty decently easy schedule here for Michigan. Now, Michigan State, Coach CTE. We've got Georgia Southern, South Florida, Kent State, and Oklahoma on the schedule there in Week 5. That'll be an interesting game, Michigan State and Oklahoma. Next up, we've got Coach Rick, who makes the schedule, so he knows what's coming. But the Rose Bowl kickoff will be USC and Minnesota. They've got Utah on the schedule, and then they've got Ohio, and their other game, it looks to be Iowa State. So some very interesting out-of-conference games. Definitely not taking it easy on himself. And then a very tough opening Big Ten matchup against Penn State as well. Now, Coach Airborne, NC State, they are going to start out against Alabama, Georgia State, at Houston, and then they start their conference games. And then they also face Arkansas towards the end of the season for the Wolfpack and their freshman quarterback, Poppy Showtime. Next up, we got Nebraska Coach Zach. They'll be taking on Arkansas State. They got Georgia State on the schedule. Conference game, remember, they are moving to the Big Ten this year. They've also then got Missouri and then Iowa and Colorado to finish off the year. Next up, New Mexico. The Lobos are going at Temple, at Arizona. They've got Troy and Western Kentucky on the schedule, so pretty favorable draw. See that they could squeeze out maybe one or two of those games. But then they got to face some of these tough teams here in the division. It's going to be a lot harder to win that division in the Mountain West. Next up, North Carolina, a lot of people's favorite to win the national championship this season. They came up just short in season 16. They'll be facing that Week 0 matchup against Michigan, like we saw. Then you got Clemson, Charlotte in the non-conference, South Carolina in the non-conference, and Coastal Carolina in the non-conference. And this is a very light schedule. Their cross-divisional games are NC State, Clemson, and Florida State. So those should be pretty okay. Michigan's going to be a fun one, though, to start the season. That's going to be a preseason top 5 matchup, I believe. I just released the preseason rankings. So that's going to be a fun one. Next up, the Denton Fatties. We could see Deasley getting fired this year. They'll start at Wisconsin, at South Alabama, and then Indiana at home, and then they also have Utah State at home before starting a Conference USA slate. Pretty favorable draw, if you don't say so myself. They would really like to get a nice start and beat SMU on the road. Notre Dame, independent team this year. They'll start out Week 0 in the Memphis kickoff against UTSA and Coach Dogwater. They'll go on the road to face Coach Rosie against Syracuse. Memphis is technically a conference game because it's independent. Baylor's on the schedule. They've got Stanford, UNLV, Indiana, and then USC to finish the season. Now we've got Ohio. We've got Louisiana Tech, Virginia on the schedule, Auburn, and Minnesota. So going with a tough slate here for the non-conference. This is Ohio, who's probably the odds-on favorite to win the MAC. So they're taking a swing in non-conference to hopefully upset either Minnesota or Auburn. Now we got Oklahoma State, Coach Ved. They got to face Auburn in that Cotton Bowl kickoff like we saw. They also got Michigan, Louisiana, and then their other non-conference game is going to be Tulsa. But they finished the year Baylor, Texas, Oklahoma. It's going to be a tough slate there for Coach Ved. Now we go to Ole Miss down in the SEC. They'll be facing Missouri, Oklahoma, which are two former SEC teams. And then Memphis, who is a independent team, and then they finish up obviously in the Egg Bowl, but their other non-conference game is going to be Tulane. All right, folks, are you ready for the New Heights Classic revealed? And we've got week 0, but then in week 1, automatic game day, the New Heights Classic down at NRG Stadium. It is going to be Oklahoma taking on Oregon. I guess it's in week 3. Never mind. It's in week 3. But the New Heights Classic will be Oklahoma and Oregon. Coach Jay Jettas and Taylor Prado taking on his former team down at NRG Stadium. So that is going to be the New Heights Classic this season. So that will be automatic game day in week 3. And looks like they also got Kansas, Tulsa on the schedule, a couple tune-up games, and then Boston College as well before they start the slate there. Oregon State, they've got Toledo, App State, Ball State, and Mississippi State. So favorable non-conference. We'll see if they can scrape together a couple of wins in the conference schedule. Penn State and Coach Dave, he's back, and they will start at Rutgers. They've got Temple. They've got Minnesota's their first conference game. And then they've also got West Virginia on the schedule. And then they also, who is their final non-conference game? 1, 2, 3, and then Pittsburgh. Now Rutgers and Kenzie, he is going to start against Penn State and then Tennessee. Oh no, Ham Soul is in for a rough one, but then they get a cupcake in Indiana for starting the conference slate, and Texas State is their final non-conference game there later on. Remember, folks, all you got to do is win your conference to make the college football playoff. So while you want to win your out-of-conference games, it might be advantageous to face some better teams so that you can get a better resume. So now we got Coach McNasty at San Diego State. He's going to face Charlotte, Arkansas State, in Central Michigan, his old stomping grounds. And then he'll also face Navy before starting his conference slate. San Diego State has their guy back. You never know if they could go all the way. So now we got SMU in Coach Mushbrain. They've got Troy on the schedule. So Wandale Hootie facing his former team in week 1. You got at UNLV week 2. North Texas, they've got Baylor on the schedule, like we said earlier. And then they also have got TCU on the schedule, per usual. Stanford and Coach MLB Rules, they got at Buffalo. They've got Fresno State. They've got Notre Dame. And then they've also got San Jose State and Fresno State. I already said that. Buffalo and Notre Dame. Yeah, that's 4. And remember, BYU is now in the Pac-12. Syracuse and Coach Rosie. She's facing Virginia Tech, Notre Dame, Tulsa, and then it looks like Boston College in the non-conference. And they finish with 4 home games. That's going to be interesting for Syracuse. Next up, we got the Temple Owls. Coach Boebert, he'll be facing New Mexico, Penn State, UCLA, and Michigan in the non-conference. Tennessee, the best roster in the country this season in the Peach Bowl kickoff, will be facing BYU, our Citrus Bowl winners. They'll also have at Rutgers, they'll have Southern Miss, and Old Dominion on the schedule. Once again, as always, Tennessee has an incredibly light end of the season. After Alabama, they got Old Dominion, South Carolina, Auburn, Kentucky, Vanderbilt. Yuck. Next up, we got Coach Phi at Texas State. They'll be facing at Texas Tech. They've got Vanderbilt. They've got FIU and Rutgers on the schedule before that battle of I-35 to end the year. Texas Tech and Coach Pizza, they'll be facing Texas State at Georgia Tech. Then they start their Big 12 slate. Then they got UNLV on the schedule, and they've also got Arkansas to end the season. Troy and Coach Uni, like we said, will be facing at SMU. They've got Auburn, New Mexico, and Iowa State on the schedule. Tulane and Coach Maddox has Utah State, Kansas State, and then they've also got LSU per usual and Ole Miss on the schedule. So a couple SEC teams here for Coach Maddox. UCF and Coach Mercury, new coach. They'll be starting out at Miami. Western Michigan, who is a cupcake. You got Florida State. And then Navy as your non-conference games before starting a really, it seems the Sun Belt is not all that hard this year. I mean, skipping Southern Miss and Western Kentucky, those are basically the only tough teams in the conference. UCF has a light schedule. So now UNLV and Coach Cryo, they've got Colorado State to kick off the season. Then they got SMU, UTSA, they got Notre Dame and Texas Tech on the schedule, but they also have 4 home games to end the season. USC is facing Minnesota in that Week 0 kickoff. Coastal Carolina, they've got Wisconsin, and then they've got Notre Dame. This is a USC team, remember, folks, that has won the Pac-12 2 years in a row. Can they go for a third with Coach Crew? UTEP, we got Florida Man here. Washington State to kick off against Sky Flyer. You got UCLA, Marshall, and Iowa is the non-conference games. Pretty doable schedule, but a very rough roster. And here it is, UTSA. Coach Dogwater will be facing Notre Dame in Week 0, at Wyoming, UNLV, and Maryland before starting their conference schedule. They've got a bit of a tough 2-game stretch, North Texas and Tulane before a bye, and then finally facing Texas State. Virginia, one of our new coaches, has Arizona, Ohio, Louisiana, and San Jose State in the non-conference. Virginia Tech is trying to not to get fired. Syracuse on the schedule, Northwestern, Michigan, and then Boston College as well. Washington and Coach Damian, they've got Wake Forest, Florida, Bowling Green, and Northern Illinois. So very light schedule this season, trying to get a few layups here before a tough conference slate. Washington State and Coach Sky Flyer, they've got UTEP, Toledo, they've got Air Force, and then they've also got Colorado State on the schedule. So another light work schedule here for them. West Virginia and Coach Hud. He has Arkansas on the schedule, Wake Forest, Penn State, and it looks like Syracuse. The Schwartz and Walder Trophy. What a name. What a name. Actually, that's a conference game. Remember, new AAC conference is very, very fun, but also very, very... so, like, Maryland is the non-conference game. And then finally, the last schedule we will reveal on stream is Wyoming. They made the playoff last year. They won a game. They'll be facing East Carolina in the San Diego kickoff. They got UTSA. They've got Louisiana Tech. And they've also are going on the road to face Oklahoma before they start the conference slate. And they finish the year with Utah State. So that's all the schedules, folks. Thanks you for watching. This will be uploaded to YouTube. If you want to check out the full schedule of you and your conference opponents, I'll be posting the full grids here in a couple of minutes in Discord. So as always, guys, thanks for watching.